The last copper penny clinked into the mason jar with a sound that made Josephine Fletcher's heart skip, because after 4 years of scrubbing floors, mending clothes, and saving every cent that passed through her calloused hands, she finally had enough money to buy her own piece of land in the Arizona Territory. She held the jar up to the afternoon light streaming through the window of her tiny rented room above the general store in Tucson, watching the coins gleam like captured sunlight. And for the first time since her parents died of cholera when she was 19, she allowed herself to believe that she might actually belong somewhere in this vast and unforgiving world. It was March of 1878, and the Arizona Territory was still raw and wild, a place where fortunes were made and lost on the turn of a card or the swing of a pickaxe. Josephine had arrived in Tucson 4 years earlier with nothing but the clothes on her back and a burning determination never to be at anyone's mercy again. Her parents had been homesteaders in Kansas, but after they died, distant relatives swooped in like vultures and claimed everything, leaving Josephine with nothing but her pride and her stubborn refusal to beg. She had worked as a seamstress, a laundress, a cook, and anything else that would put coins in her jar without compromising her dignity. She set the jar down carefully on the small table that served as her dining area, workspace, and desk, then pulled out the folded newspaper clipping she had been carrying in her apron pocket for 3 months. The advertisement was worn soft from constant handling, but the words were still clear. 40 acres for sale, 5 miles north of Tucson, good water, suitable for farming or ranching, $200 or best offer. She had exactly $212 in that jar, which meant she could buy the land and have $12 left for supplies. The next morning, Josephine wore her best dress, a simple gray cotton that she had sewn herself, and pinned her dark blonde hair into a neat bun at the nape of her neck. She was 23 years old, tall and strong from years of hard work, with clear gray eyes that had learned to hide both hope and fear. She carried the mason jar wrapped in a shawl, holding it against her chest like a child as she walked through the dusty streets of Tucson toward the land office. The clerk at the land office was a balding man with spectacles who looked at her with surprise when she set the jar on his counter with a heavy clink. "I am here to inquire about the 40-acre parcel advertised in the newspaper," she said, keeping her voice steady and businesslike. He pushed his spectacles up his nose and regarded her with a mixture of skepticism and curiosity. "That is a lot of land for a woman alone to manage." "I did not come here for advice on what I can manage," Josephine replied coolly. "I came here to purchase land. Is the property still available?" The clerk's expression shifted to something resembling respect. "It is available. The owner is a man named Harold Sykes, who is moving back east. However, I should inform you that there is another party interested in the property, a local rancher who has been negotiating the price." Josephine's heart sank, but she refused to let her disappointment show. "The advertisement said $200. I have that amount." "The rancher has offered $180, and Sykes was considering it because the rancher would pay in gold coin rather than mixed currency." The clerk looked at her jar with its visible collection of pennies, nickels, dimes, and occasional paper bills. "Sykes is supposed to meet with the rancher this afternoon to finalize the sale." "Where can I find Mr. Sykes?" Josephine asked. The clerk hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "He is staying at the Congress Hall Hotel until he leaves for Philadelphia tomorrow morning. But, miss, I would advise you to be careful. The rancher interested in that property is not a man who takes kindly to competition." Josephine thanked him and walked the 3 blocks to the Congress Hall Hotel, her mind racing. She had not come this far to be outbid by someone who had not even offered the asking price. The hotel was the finest in Tucson, with a broad front porch and whitewashed walls that seemed to glow in the intense Arizona sun. She climbed the steps and entered the lobby, where a desk clerk looked at her with the same automatic dismissiveness she had come to expect. "I need to speak with Mr. Harold Sykes," she said. "It is a matter of business." The desk clerk, a young man with pomaded hair, gave her a condescending smile. "Mr. Sykes is in the dining room taking his lunch. I'm afraid he cannot be disturbed." Josephine walked past him toward the dining room before he could protest. She heard him sputter behind her, but she kept moving, her eyes scanning the room until she spotted a distinguished older man with silver hair sitting alone at a table by the window. She approached him directly, ignoring the stares of the other diners. "Mr. Sykes?" she asked. He looked up from his plate of beef and potatoes, startled but not displeased. "Yes?" "My name is Josephine Fletcher. I understand you are selling 40 acres north of town. I would like to purchase it at your asking price of $200. She set the wrapped jar on the table with a solid thunk. Harold Sykes studied her for a long moment, then gestured to the empty chair across from him. "Please sit down, Miss Fletcher." She sat, keeping her back straight and her hands folded in her lap. Up close, she could see that Sykes had kind eyes, the sort of eyes that had seen both joy and sorrow and had learned wisdom from both. "I admire your directness," he said, "but I must be equally direct with you. I have a meeting this afternoon with Marcus Tanner, who owns the Bartee Ranch. He has offered $180 for the property, and while that is less than my asking price, he is an established rancher with resources and connections. I confess I was leaning toward accepting his offer because the land is somewhat rough, and I worry about selling it to someone who might not be able to make use of it." "I have worked every day for 4 years to save the money for land," Josephine said quietly. "I can read and write and calculate figures. I know how to plant crops, tend animals, mend fences, and fix a roof. I am not afraid of hard work, and I'm not afraid of rough land. What I am afraid of is spending the rest of my life working to make someone else rich, while I die with nothing to show for my time on this earth." Sykes's expression softened. "You remind me of my daughter," he said. "She had that same fire in her eyes. She passed away 3 years ago from a fever, and it is part of why I'm returning to Philadelphia. This territory took someone I loved, and I find I cannot bear to stay here any longer." "I am sorry for your loss," Josephine said, and meant it. He nodded slowly. "The land has a small cabin on it, nothing fancy, just 4 walls and a roof, but it is sound. There is a creek that runs through the eastern portion, and it has never gone dry, not even in the worst summers. The soil is decent for crops if you can manage the irrigation, and there is enough grazing for cattle or horses. I had planned to build something there, but after my daughter died, I lost the heart for it." "I will care for it," Josephine said. "I will build something good there." Sykes was quiet for a moment. Then he made his decision. "I believe you will. The land is yours, Miss Fletcher, for $200. Meet me at the land office at 4 o'clock this afternoon, and we will complete the transaction. But I must warn you, Marcus Tanner will not be pleased. He is accustomed to getting what he wants." "Thank you, Mr. Sykes," Josephine said, feeling a surge of joy so intense it almost frightened her. "Thank you." She left the hotel walking on air, but her elation was short-lived. As she crossed the street, a man on horseback nearly ran her down. She jumped back just in time, and the rider wheeled his large bay horse around to glare at her. "Watch where you are going, woman! He snapped. Josephine looked up at him and saw a man in his 40s with a thick mustache and cold eyes. His clothes were expensive, his boots polished, and his saddle decorated with silver conchos. Everything about him spoke of money and power. "Perhaps you should watch where you ride your horse," she replied, refusing to be cowed. His eyes narrowed. "I know every person in this town, and I do not know you. Who are you?" "That is none of your concern," she said, and walked away, feeling his eyes on her back like a physical weight. She did not know it then, but that was Marcus Tanner, and she had just made her first enemy in the Arizona Territory. At 4 o'clock, Josephine met Harold Sykes at the land office. The clerk who had helped her that morning looked nervous as he prepared the paperwork. "Mr. Tanner was here an hour ago," he said in a low voice. "He was not happy to learn that the property had been sold to someone else. He said he would be speaking with you, Mr. Sykes." "Marcus Tanner does not run this territory, despite what he may believe," Sykes said calmly. He counted Josephine's money carefully, separating the coins and bills into neat stacks, then nodded with satisfaction. $200, exactly as agreed. The clerk prepared the deed, writing in careful script, and Josephine watched as he filled in her name, Josephine Marie Fletcher. When he blotted the ink and handed her the document, she held it with trembling hands. The deed to her land. Her land. The words seemed impossible, like something from a dream. "Congratulations, Miss Fletcher," Sykes said, shaking her hand. "May that land bring you all the happiness I hope to find there." She walked out of the land office as the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the dusty street. She had $12 left, a deed to 40 acres, and more hope than she had felt in years. She spent the evening packing her few belongings into a single trunk and a carpet bag, then lay awake most of the night too excited to sleep. The next morning she hired a wagon and driver to take her and her belongings out to her property. The driver was a grizzled old man named Pete who had prospected for gold in California during the rush of 1849 and had stories to fill the 5-mile journey. "You are going to be living out there alone?" he asked as the wagon bounced along the rutted road. "Yes," Josephine said simply. Pete shook his head. "That is rough country. You will be needing supplies, and you will be needing to know how to shoot. There are rattlesnakes, mountain lions, and occasionally Apache passing through, though they mostly keep to themselves these days. And then there are the two-legged varmints, which can be worse than any animal." "I can learn to shoot," Josephine said, though the thought made her nervous. She had never held a gun in her life. When they crested the final rise and she saw her land spread out before her, Josephine felt her breath catch. The cabin sat in a small valley surrounded by rolling hills dotted with mesquite and saguaro cactus. The creek Sykes had mentioned was visible as a line of cottonwood trees cutting through the eastern portion of the property. The cabin itself was small and weathered, but it had glass windows and a stone chimney, and to Josephine, it looked like a palace. Pete helped her unload her trunk and carpet bag, then stood looking at her with concern. "You sure about this, miss? It is not too late to head back to town." "I am sure," Josephine said. "Thank you for your help, Pete." After he left, she stood alone in front of her cabin listening to the silence. It was not the silence of the city, which was always underlaid with the sounds of people and horses and commerce. This was the deep silence of open country, broken only by the whisper of wind through the mesquite and the distant cry of a hawk. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. She spent the rest of that day exploring her property. The cabin had a dirt floor but solid walls and roof. There was a small stove for cooking and heat, a narrow bed frame with a straw mattress that would need to be replaced, and a table with 2 chairs. Outside, there was a lean-to that could serve as a stable and a stone-lined well with clean, cold water. The creek was just as Sykes had described, a small but steady flow of water that would be essential for any crops or animals. That night she built a fire in the stove and made herself a simple meal of beans and cornbread. As she ate, sitting at the table in her own cabin on her own land, she felt tears sliding down her cheeks. They were not tears of sadness, but of overwhelming relief. She had done it. She had actually done it. The next few days passed in a blur of work. She swept out the cabin, scrubbed the windows, and beat the dust out of the mattress. She walked every foot of her 40 acres, learning the contours of the land, finding the best spots for a garden and where the soil was rockiest. She made lists of everything she would need: seeds, tools, lumber for repairs, chickens, perhaps a cow, and yes, a gun. On the 4th day, she walked the 5 miles into Tucson to buy supplies. She had to be careful with her remaining money, but she managed to purchase seed for corn, beans, and squash, a hoe and rake, some lumber for fixing the lean-to, and a laying hen that the general store owner threw in for free because he said she looked like someone who could use some luck. She was walking out of town carrying her parcels and leading the hen in a small crate when a group of riders blocked her path. There were 4 of them, and the man in front was Marcus Tanner. "Miss Fletcher," he said, his voice cold, "I believe we have business to discuss." Josephine set down her parcels carefully, keeping her expression neutral. "I do not believe we have any business, Mr. Tanner." "You purchased land that I had an agreement to buy," Tanner said. "You made an offer below the asking price," Josephine replied. "I met the asking price. That is not theft. That is commerce. One of Tanner's men, a lean cowboy with a scar across his cheek, laughed. She has got a mouth on her, boss. Tanner did not smile. That land borders my property. I need it for my cattle operation. I am prepared to offer you $250 for it, a tidy profit for 4 days of ownership. It is not for sale, Josephine said. Be reasonable, Tanner said, and there was a threat underlying his reasonable tone. A woman alone cannot manage a homestead. You will fail within 6 months, and then you will have nothing. Sell to me now, take your profit, and return to whatever you were doing before. No, Josephine said flatly. Now please move your horses. I have work to do. For a moment, she thought Tanner might do something violent. His face darkened, and his hand moved toward the revolver at his hip. But then one of his other men spoke up. A younger cowboy with sun-bleached brown hair and startlingly blue eyes. Boss, we are blocking the street, the young cowboy said quietly. People are watching. Tanner looked around and seemed to realize they had attracted an audience. He forced a smile that did not reach his eyes. We will speak again, Miss Fletcher, when you have had time to reconsider. He wheeled his horse around and rode off, his men following. All except the young cowboy with blue eyes, who lingered for just a moment looking at Josephine with an expression she could not quite read. Then he touched the brim of his hat and rode after the others. Josephine picked up her parcels with shaking hands and continued her walk home, trying to ignore the fear that had settled in her stomach like a stone. Marcus Tanner was exactly the sort of man Pete had warned her about, the two-legged varmint kind. When she reached her cabin, she unloaded her supplies and settled the hen into a small coop she had fashioned from scrap wood and chicken wire. As the sun set, she sat on the step of her cabin and wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. But no, she told herself firmly. She had worked too hard and come too far to let a bully like Tanner frighten her away. The next morning she was awakened by the sound of hammering. She sat up in bed, confused and alarmed. The sun was just rising, casting golden light through her windows. She quickly dressed and went outside to find the young cowboy from Tanner's group working on her lean-to, replacing the rotted boards with fresh lumber. "What are you doing?" she demanded. He looked up, wiping sweat from his forehead despite the cool morning air. "Good morning, Miss Fletcher. I'm fixing your stable. I noticed the other day that these boards were about to give way." "I can see that," Josephine said. "What I cannot see is why you are doing it or how you got here or where you got that lumber." He set down his hammer and walked over to her, moving with an easy grace that reminded her of water flowing downhill following its natural course. Up close, she could see he was young, probably not more than 25 or 26, with a sunburn across his nose and laugh lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled more often than he frowned. "My name is James Holloway," he said, offering his hand. "I work for Marcus Tanner, but I do not work for him because I admire his business practices. I work for him because jobs are scarce and he pays wages on time. I rode out here this morning before my shift because I wanted to apologize for the way he treated you yesterday, and I figured the best apology was to actually be helpful." Josephine shook his hand, noting the calluses that matched her own. "You do not need to apologize for your employer's behavior." "Maybe not, but I wanted to anyway," James said. "And I wanted to warn you. Tanner is not a man who accepts refusal gracefully. He will try to make things difficult for you." "I do not scare easily," Josephine said, though her heart was beating fast for reasons that had nothing to do with fear. James smiled, and it transformed his face from merely handsome to genuinely beautiful. "I can see that. But all the same, it does not hurt to have a neighbor who knows one end of a hammer from the other. My family has a small ranch about 3 miles west of here. Just my father, my younger sister, and me. We run a few head of cattle and some horses. If you ever need help, you can find us there." "Why would you help me?" Josephine asked. You work for the man who wants to drive me off my land." James picked up his hammer again and turned back to the lean-to. "Like I said, I work for Tanner because I need the wages, but that does not mean I agree with everything he does. And besides, I believe a person ought to be able to own land and work it without being harassed, whether that person wears trousers or a skirt." Josephine felt warmth spreading through her chest, and she told herself it was just gratitude. "Thank you. Mr. Holloway, can I at least offer you breakfast?" "I would not say no to coffee if you have it," James said. She went inside and made coffee and cornbread, and they sat on the step of her cabin eating and watching the sun rise higher over the hills. James told her about his family. His father, Robert Holloway, had been a cavalry officer who retired after being wounded in a skirmish with Apache raiders. His mother had died when his sister Anna was born, and Robert had raised both children while trying to build a modest ranch. James had been working for Tanner for 2 years, saving money to expand their herd and improve their land. "My father was injured again last winter," James said quietly. "His horse threw him, and he broke his leg badly. It did not set right, and now he walks with a cane. He cannot do the heavy work anymore, so I am trying to earn enough to hire help for our ranch while I work at the bar tea." "That must be difficult," Josephine said. "It is what needs to be done," James said simply. "Family takes care of family." There was a comfortable silence between them, and Josephine found herself studying his profile as he gazed out at the landscape. There was something solid and steady about him, like the trunk of an old tree that had weathered many storms. "I should get going," James said reluctantly. "I need to be at the bar tea by 8 and Tanner docks wages if you are late, but I will come back when I can to finish up that stable. And Miss Fletcher, please be careful. Tanner has been known to send men to make trouble for homesteaders he wants to drive out. He might cut your fences, spook your animals, things like that." "I will be careful," Josephine promised. "And thank you truly." After James left, Josephine stood for a long moment watching the dust settle on the road where he had ridden away. She told herself not to be foolish. He was just being neighborly, nothing more. But she could not quite shake the feeling that something important had just happened, like the first crack in a dam before the water comes rushing through. The weeks that followed fell into a pattern of hard work and small victories. Josephine planted her garden, carefully rationing water from the creek. She repaired the fence around her property using mesquite posts and wire she purchased on her increasingly rare trips to town. She learned to bake bread in her small stove, to patch holes in the cabin roof, and to coax eggs from her single hen, whom she had named Harriet. James Holloway came by 3 more times to work on her lean-to and help with repairs she could not manage alone. Each visit was brief, snatched from his scarce free time, but Josephine found herself looking forward to them with an intensity that both thrilled and frightened her. They talked easily about everything and nothing, the weather, the land, their hopes for the future. James had a dry sense of humor that made her laugh, and a gentleness in the way he handled tools and animals that spoke to his character. On his 4th visit, he brought his sister Anna with him. Anna was 18, a pretty girl with her brother's blue eyes and a friendly, open manner. She brought a basket of biscuits and a jar of honey. "James talks about you constantly," Anna said with a teasing grin as Josephine invited them inside. "I wanted to meet the woman who impressed my brother so much." James turned red to the tips of his ears. "Anna, I said no such thing." "You said she was brave and hardworking and had beautiful gray eyes," Anna said innocently. "Was I not supposed to share that?" Josephine felt her own face heating. "Would you like some coffee?" she asked, mostly to change the subject. They spent a pleasant afternoon together. Anna was full of gossip from town and stories about the various characters who populated the territory. She told Josephine about old Mrs. Chen, who ran the laundry and was rumored to have once been a Chinese princess, about Father Miguel at the mission, who had been a bullfighter in Spain before he took his vows, and about the owner of the saloon who had fought for the Confederacy and had the scars to prove it. "You must be careful in town," Anna said more seriously. "Marcus Tanner has been telling people that you tricked Mr. Sykes into selling you land that was promised to him. It is not true, of course, but some people believe him because he is rich and influential." "Let them believe what they want," Josephine said, though the news troubled her. "I have the deed, and that is all that matters." "Father says you should come to dinner at our ranch," Anna said. "He wants to meet you and welcome you properly to the area." "I would like that," Josephine said, and meant it. She had been lonely, though she had tried not to admit it to herself. The dinner at the Holloway Ranch the following Sunday was one of the happiest evenings Josephine had spent since her parents died. Robert Holloway was a gruff, weathered man with James's same steady gaze and a quick wit that belied his stern appearance. He had cooked a roast chicken with vegetables from their garden, and they ate at a long wooden table in a room warmed by a crackling fire. "James tells me you're from Kansas originally," Robert said. "This country must be quite different from what you are used to." "It is drier and hotter," Josephine admitted. "But it is beautiful in its own way, and it is mine which makes all the difference." Robert nodded approvingly. "A person needs something of their own in this world. Too many people content themselves with scraps from other men's tables. You have courage, Miss Fletcher." "Or stubbornness," Josephine said with a slight smile. "Sometimes it is hard to tell the difference." "In my experience, the best people have a healthy dose of both," Robert said. After dinner, James walked Josephine outside while Anna helped her father clean up. The night was cool and clear, with more stars visible than Josephine had ever seen in her life. They stood together in the yard, not quite touching, but close enough that Josephine could feel the warmth radiating from James's body. "Your family is wonderful," she said softly. "They like you," James replied. "Anna has been pestering me all week about when you were coming to visit." "And your father?" "He said you have grit," James said. "Coming from him, that is the highest compliment possible." There was a charged silence between them, and Josephine felt her heart hammering in her chest. She knew they were standing at a precipice, and whatever happened next would change things between them forever. "Josephine," James said quietly, and it was the first time he had used her given name. "I need to tell you something. I have been thinking about you constantly since the day I met you. I know we have not known each other long, and I know you are dealing with enough trouble from Tanner without adding complications, but I cannot keep pretending I do not feel what I feel." "What do you feel?" Josephine asked, her voice barely above a whisper. James turned to face her fully, and even in the starlight she could see the intensity in his eyes. "I feel like I have been waiting my whole life to meet someone like you. Someone strong and brave and determined, someone who does not give up when things get hard. I think about you when I am working. I think about you when I am trying to sleep. I think about what it would be like to build something together, to face whatever comes side by side." Josephine felt tears stinging her eyes. "I think about you too," she admitted. "But James, I have nothing to offer. I have 40 acres of rough land, a cabin with a dirt floor, and enemies I never wanted. You could do so much better." "Better than a woman who saved every penny for 4 years to buy her own land? Better than someone who stands up to bullies and is not afraid of hard work?" James reached out and gently took her hand. "Josephine, you are everything I want, but I will not push. If you need time to think, I will give you time. If you want me to leave you alone, I will respect that. But I had to tell you how I felt." Josephine looked down at their joined hands, his rough and tanned, hers small but equally work-worn. She thought about the fear and loneliness of the past weeks. She thought about how much lighter everything felt when James was near. She thought about the way her heart leapt every time she saw him riding up the road to her cabin. "I do not want you to leave me alone," she said finally. "I want exactly what you want. I want to build something together. I want to face whatever comes side by side." James smiled, and then he was pulling her close, and then they were kissing under a sky full of stars. It was Josephine's first real kiss, and it felt like coming home and setting out on an adventure all at once. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, James rested his forehead against hers. "I promise I will do right by you," he said. "I will work hard and treat you as an equal partner in everything. Your land will stay your land, and I will never try to take that from you." "Our land," Josephine said impulsively. "If we are going to build something together, it should be ours, not mine." James pulled back to look at her. "Are you sure?" You worked so hard for that land." "I am sure," Josephine said. "I spent 4 years working alone to buy something that was mine. But now I think maybe I want something that is ours." They talked late into the night, sitting on the porch of the Holloway ranch house, making plans and dreaming dreams. James wanted to quit working for Tanner and focus on building up both his family's ranch and Josephine's property. Together, they had enough land to run a decent-sized cattle operation. Josephine's creek would be essential for water, and the Holloway ranch had better grazing land. They could combine their resources and create something sustainable. "But first, I need to give proper notice to Tanner," James said practically, "and we should probably court for at least a few months before we make any big changes. I do not want people thinking I'm rushing you into anything." "People are going to talk no matter what we do," Josephine said, "but yes, we should take our time and do this properly." Over the next 2 months, James courted Josephine with a patience and respect that made her fall more deeply in love with him every day. He came by her cabin several evenings a week after finishing his work at the bar T, always bringing something useful: nails, a length of rope, a sack of flour, a book he thought she might enjoy. They worked side by side on improvements to her property, building a proper chicken coop, expanding the garden, and digging irrigation channels from the creek. Josephine met James for picnics on Sundays, their one guaranteed day together. They explored the hills around her property, discovering a small canyon filled with wildflowers and a rocky outcropping that gave a view for miles in every direction. They talked about everything: their childhoods, their dreams, their fears, the future they hoped to build together. "I want children someday," James told her during one of their picnics. 3 or 4 if we are blessed. "I want to teach them to ride and to read, and to treat everyone with respect regardless of their station." "I want that too," Josephine said. "I want to give them the stability I lost when my parents died. I want them to know they always have a home to come back to." In late May, James gave his notice to Marcus Tanner. It did not go well. "You are quitting to play house with that Fletcher woman?" Tanner said, his voice dripping with contempt. "I should have known you were too soft to work for me long term. Fine, go. But do not come crying to me when her homestead fails and you are both destitute." James walked away without responding, refusing to be baited into an argument. But Tanner was not finished making trouble. 2 nights after James quit, someone cut the fence on Josephine's property and drove off her 3 chickens, including Harriet. She found the fence the next morning and with it a note that said, "Last warning, sell or suffer." James arrived to find her standing in the middle of the destruction, shaking with rage rather than fear. "He is not going to drive me away," she said fiercely. "I do not care what he does." "We will fix the fence," James said calmly, "and we will get more chickens. But Josephine, we need to be smart about this. Tanner is escalating, and if we are not careful, someone could get hurt." They rode into Tucson together and filed a complaint with the marshal, a weary man named Tom Brackett, who listened to their story with obvious skepticism. "Do you have proof it was Tanner?" Brackett asked. "Who else would it be?" Josephine demanded. "That is not proof, Miss Tour," Brackett said. "Marcus Tanner is a respected businessman in this territory. I cannot go accusing him of vandalism without evidence." "So we are supposed to just wait until he does something worse?" James asked, his voice tight with controlled anger. "I will send a deputy to patrol your area more frequently," Brackett offered. "But beyond that, there is not much I can do. My advice is to consider selling. It seems like more trouble than it is worth." "Everything worth having is trouble," Josephine said, and walked out of the marshal's office with her head held high. They repaired the fence together, working in grim silence. When they finished, James pulled Josephine into his arms and held her tightly. "I am not going to let him hurt you," he said into her hair. "We will protect each other," Josephine corrected. "That is what partners do." The attacks continued over the next few weeks. Someone poisoned her garden well, forcing her to haul water from the creek for several days while James dug a new one. Someone shot at her water barrels in the night, riddling them with holes. Each time, they repaired the damage and filed reports with the unhelpful marshal's office. But despite the harassment, Josephine found herself happier than she had been in years. James had moved his things into her cabin, and they were living together openly, much to the scandal of some of the more conservative residents of Tucson. They did not care. They were building a life together, and they refused to let Marcus Tanner's vendetta destroy what they were creating. In early June, James proposed properly. They were sitting on the rocky outcropping that had become their favorite spot, watching the sun set over the desert. He pulled a simple gold band from his pocket and took her hand. "Josephine Marie Fletcher, will you marry me?" he asked. "I know you already said yes to building a life together, but I want to make it official. I want everyone to know that we are a team, now and forever." "Yes," Josephine said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, absolutely yes." They were married a week later in a simple ceremony at the mission, with Father Miguel officiating. Robert Holloway walked Josephine down the aisle, and Anna stood up as her witness. A handful of friends they had made in the territory attended, including old Pete the wagon driver and Mrs. Chen from the laundry. It was small and simple and perfect. After the ceremony, they returned to the cabin that was now officially their home. James carried Josephine over the threshold, both of them laughing, and set her down gently in the main room. "Welcome home, Mrs. Holloway," he said, and kissed her soundly. That night, they lay together in the narrow bed, tangled in each other's arms, and talked about their plans for the future. "I want to officially combine our properties," James said. "We should go to the land office and put both our names on both deeds. Your land and my family's land should belong to both of us equally." "Are you sure?" Josephine asked. "What about your father and Anna?" "My father has been talking about moving into town," James said. "His leg bothers him more in the cold, and the ranch house is isolated. Anna wants to open a dress shop in Tucson. She has been sewing for years, and she is good at it. They are both ready to move on to the next phase of their lives. My father says the ranch should be ours to do with as we see fit." "Let us put both our names on the deed," Josephine said decisively. "That way, no matter what happens, we both have an equal stake. We are partners in every sense of the word." The next week, they rode into Tucson together to visit the land office. The same clerk who had helped Josephine the first time looked up with recognition and a genuine smile. "Mrs. Holloway," he said, "congratulations on your marriage. How can I help you today?" "We want to add my husband's name to the deed for my 40 acres, Josephine said, "and we want to add my name to the deed for his family's ranch. We want both properties to be jointly owned." The clerk nodded and began preparing the paperwork. As he worked, Josephine glanced out the window and saw Marcus Tanner standing across the street, watching the land office with cold, calculating eyes. She felt a chill run down her spine but refused to look away. After a long moment, Tanner turned and walked away, but the encounter left her uneasy. "All done?" the clerk said, handing them the updated deeds. "Both properties are now jointly owned by James and Josephine Holloway. May I say, I think what you are doing is admirable. It is not often you see a husband willing to put his wife's name on the deed as an equal owner." "It is not generosity," James said, putting his arm around Josephine's waist. "It is simply fairness. She worked just as hard for this land as I did. It should belong to both of us equally." They walked out of the land office together, and Josephine felt a sense of rightness settle over her. They were married, their land was jointly owned, and they were ready to face whatever challenges came next as true partners. The challenges came sooner than expected. 2 nights later, someone set fire to the lean-to they had been using as a stable. James woke to the smell of smoke and the panicked neighing of their horses. He and Josephine rushed outside and managed to free the horses before the structure collapsed. But they lost the building and most of their tack. This time, there had been a witness. A traveling merchant passing by had seen 2 men on horseback riding away from the property, and he recognized one of them as a man who worked for Marcus Tanner. He was willing to testify to Marshal Brackett. The next morning, Josephine and James rode into town with the merchant, a man named Samuel Worth, and presented their evidence to the marshal. Brackett listened with a grim expression, then sighed heavily. "I will bring Tanner in for questioning, War," he said. "But Worth, you need to understand that testifying against Marcus Tanner could make you enemies in this territory." "I understand," Worth said firmly, "but I also understand the difference between right and wrong. What those men did was attempted murder. If the Holloways had not woken up when they did, that fire could have spread to their cabin. Brackett brought Tanner in that afternoon. Josephine and James were there to hear the confrontation. Tanner denied everything, claiming that the witness was mistaken and that his men had been nowhere near the Holloway property. But Brackett, finally moved to action by the severity of the crime, investigated further. He found that 2 of Tanner's hands had been absent from the Bar T ranch on the night of the fire and could not account for their whereabouts. Faced with mounting evidence, one of the men confessed. He said that Tanner had offered them each $50 to burn the stable and scare the Holloways into leaving. Tanner was arrested and charged with arson and conspiracy to commit murder. The trial was held in late July, and it was the biggest event Tucson had seen in years. The courtroom was packed with spectators, and the proceedings were covered by the territorial newspaper. Josephine and James testified about the months of harassment they had endured. Samuel Worth testified about what he had seen. The confessed arsonist testified that Tanner had hired them. Tanner's lawyer, an expensive attorney brought in from Phoenix, argued that there was no physical evidence linking Tanner to the crime, and that the word of a hired hand trying to save his own skin should not be trusted. But the jury, composed of local ranchers and businessmen who were tired of Tanner's bullying tactics, did not agree. After only 2 hours of deliberation, they returned a verdict of guilty. Marcus Tanner was sentenced to 10 years in the territorial prison at Yuma. As he was led away in chains, he looked directly at Josephine and James with pure hatred in his eyes. "This is not over," he said. "Yes, it is," James replied calmly. "Your reign of intimidation in this territory is finished." With Tanner gone, life became easier for the Holloways. They rebuilt their stable, this time using stone and adobe to make it more fire-resistant. They purchased cattle and began building their herd. Josephine's garden flourished, and they sold vegetables in town for extra income. James worked from dawn to dusk, managing the ranch, and Josephine worked beside him every step of the way. Robert Holloway and Anna moved into a small house in Tucson. Anna opened her dress shop, and it quickly became popular with the ladies of the town. Robert spent his days playing chess with Father Miguel and telling stories about his cavalry days to anyone who would listen. They visited the ranch often, and Robert took obvious pride in seeing the improvements James and Josephine were making. In October, Josephine realized she was pregnant. She told James one evening as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, the same way they had spent countless evenings together. "I am going to have a baby," she said simply. James turned to her with such joy on his face that she felt tears spring to her eyes. He pulled her into his arms and held her gently, as if she were made of glass. "Are you happy?" he asked. "Happier than I ever thought possible," she said. "Scared, but happy." "We will figure it out together," James promised, "just like we have figured out everything else." The pregnancy was not easy. Josephine suffered from morning sickness for the first 3 months and fatigue that left her exhausted by mid-afternoon. But she continued to work, refusing to be treated as fragile. James hovered protectively, but learned to respect her need to contribute to the running of the ranch. In March of 1879, almost exactly 1 year after Josephine had purchased her land, she gave birth to a son. The labor was long and difficult, with Anna serving as midwife and James pacing holes in the dirt floor of the cabin. But when she finally heard her baby's first cry, all the pain was forgotten. They named him Daniel Robert Holloway, after James's father. He had his father's blue eyes and his mother's determination, making his opinions known from the very beginning with lusty cries that could be heard across the property. Robert Holloway rode out to the ranch the day after Daniel was born, and when he held his grandson for the first time, tears rolled down his weathered cheeks. "He is perfect," Robert said hoarsely. "My son, you and your wife have built something remarkable here. I am so proud of you both." As Josephine recovered from childbirth, she spent hours sitting in the rocking chair James had made for her, nursing Daniel and watching through the window as James worked on expanding their herd. She thought about how far she had come from that lonely young woman in a rented room counting pennies in a mason jar. She had her land, her husband, her son, and a future full of promise. But life on a ranch was never without challenges. When Daniel was 6 months old, a drought hit the territory. The creek that had never failed before dwindled to a trickle, and their carefully tended garden withered. Water became precious, and they had to make hard decisions about which crops to save and which to let die. James rode out every day to check on their cattle, ensuring they had access to what little water remained. Josephine rationed their household water carefully, using every drop multiple times before finally discarding it. They prayed for rain and watched the sky constantly for any sign of clouds. The drought lasted 4 months, and by the end of it, they had lost a quarter of their herd. But they survived, and when the rains finally came in November, they stood together in the downpour, laughing and crying and holding Daniel between them. "We made it through," Josephine said, wiping rain and tears from her face. "We will make it through whatever comes," James said, "as long as we are together." The years that followed were a mix of hardship and joy, as all lives are. They had good years when the rains came on time and their cattle were healthy and fat. They had bad years when disease or drought or market prices threatened their livelihood. But through it all, they worked together as true partners, making decisions jointly and supporting each other through every challenge. When Daniel was 3, Josephine gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah Ann, after James's mother and sister. Sarah had her mother's gray eyes and a quiet, thoughtful disposition that contrasted sharply with Daniel's boisterous energy. 2 years later, they had another son, Michael, who was the perfect mix of his siblings, outgoing but gentle. The ranch grew and prospered. They added more acres when a neighboring homesteader decided to move back east, and they diversified into horse breeding as well as cattle. Josephine started selling preserves and baked goods in town, and her products became so popular that Anna helped her set up a small stand at her dress shop. Robert Holloway passed away peacefully in his sleep when Daniel was 7 years old. It was a sad time, but also a celebration of a life well lived. At the funeral, James gave a eulogy that left not a dry eye in the church. "My father taught me that a man's worth is not measured by what he accumulates, but by what he builds and who he helps along the way," James said. "He taught me to treat everyone with respect, to work hard, and to stand up for what is right. Most importantly, he taught me by example what it means to be a good father. I hope I can pass those lessons on to my own children." Anna never married, preferring instead to focus on her dress shop, which had expanded into a full mercantile. She became the favorite aunt, spoiling her niece and nephews with candy and toys and adventures in town. She was content with her life and her choices, and she remained Josephine's closest friend. As their children grew, Josephine and James made sure to tell them the story of how they met and how the ranch came to be. They wanted Daniel, Sarah, and Michael to understand the value of hard work and the importance of treating people fairly. "Your mother saved every penny for 4 years to buy the land we are standing on," James told them one evening as they sat around the dinner table. "She could have given up 100 times, but she did not. She believed in herself and in the possibility of a better future." "And your father saw me as an equal when most men would not have," Josephine added. "When we got married, we put both our names on the deed to all our land. This ranch belongs to both of us equally, and someday it will belong to all of you." Daniel, who was 13 at the time and beginning to understand the ways of the world, asked, "But Pa, were you not worried about giving up control? Most men I know would never put their wife's name on the deed." James looked at Josephine with such love that it made her heart ache even after all their years together. "Control was never what I wanted," he said. "Partnership is stronger than control. Your mother and I built this ranch together, side by side. Every decision we have made together. Every success we have shared. Why would I want it any other way?" "Because you love each other," Sarah said simply, with the clarity that children sometimes possess. "Yes," Josephine said, reaching across the table to take James's hand, "because we love each other, and because love means treating your partner as an equal." The children grew and the ranch continued to prosper. Daniel became a skilled horseman and took over much of the day-to-day operation of the cattle business. Sarah showed a talent for numbers and began keeping the ranch's accounts. Michael, the youngest, developed a love for the land itself and could often be found exploring the hills, studying plants and animals with the intensity of a natural scientist. In 1895, when Josephine was 40 years old and James was 42, they stood together on the rocky outcropping where James had proposed 17 years earlier. Their children were grown, or nearly so. Their ranch was successful and debt-free, and they had weathered every storm that came their way. "Do you remember the first time we came up here?" James asked, pulling Josephine close. "I remember everything about those early days," Josephine said. "I remember being so scared and so hopeful at the same time. I remember the first time you kissed me right here under the stars. I remember thinking that maybe, just maybe, I had found someone who saw me as I truly was. I saw a woman who was braver than she knew," James said. "I saw someone who refused to let the world tell her what she could or could not do. I saw my future. I never could have built this life alone," Josephine said. "I spent 4 years working alone to buy land, but it took both of us to build a home." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the land they had built together. In the distance, they could see their ranch house, much expanded from the tiny cabin Josephine had first moved into. They could see the barns and corrals, the fields green with crops, the cattle grazing on the hills. They could see the fruits of nearly 2 decades of hard work, partnership, and love. "Do you have any regrets?" James asked. Josephine thought about the question seriously. She thought about the young woman she had been, alone and determined, counting pennies in a rented room. She thought about the fear and uncertainty of those early days, the harassment from Marcus Tanner, the droughts and difficulties. She thought about the pain of childbirth, the grief of losing Robert, the constant worry that comes with raising children and running a ranch. "Not a single one," she said finally. "Every hardship brought us closer together. Every challenge made us stronger. I would not change a moment of it." James kissed the top of her head. "Neither would I. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Josephine Holloway." They walked back to the ranch house as the stars began to appear, hand in hand as they had been since the beginning. Inside, they could hear the sounds of their family, Daniel arguing good-naturedly with Sarah about something, Michael playing with the dogs, the clatter of dishes as they prepared for dinner. That night, after the children had gone to bed, Josephine and James sat on their porch, as they did most evenings. They talked about plans for the next season, about Daniel's growing interest in a girl from town, about Sarah's dream of going to college in California, about Michael's latest discovery of a family of foxes living in the hills. "We did good," James said quietly. "We built something that will last." "We did it together," Josephine corrected. "That is what made it possible." As the years continued to pass, the Holloway Ranch became something of a legend in the territory. People spoke with respect about the couple who had built it together, who had weathered every storm as partners, and who had raised 3 fine children to carry on their legacy. When Arizona became a state in 1912, the Holloways were invited to the statehood celebration in Phoenix, honored as pioneers who had helped build the territory. By then, Josephine was 57 and James was 59. Their children were all grown and starting families of their own. Daniel had married his sweetheart and was running the cattle operation with skill and innovation. Sarah had gone to college and returned with a degree in business, helping to modernize the ranch's operations. Michael had become a teacher at the school in Tucson, though he still spent every weekend exploring the land he loved. Josephine and James had become grandparents multiple times over, and they took great joy in spoiling their grandchildren the way Anna had once spoiled their children. They told the grandchildren stories about the old days, about droughts and difficulties, about Marcus Tanner and the fire, about the early years when they had nothing but each other and a dream. "Grandma, were you scared when you bought your land all alone?" one of the grandchildren asked. "Terrified," Josephine admitted, "but I was more scared of never trying. I decided that being brave did not mean not being afraid. It meant being afraid and doing the thing anyway." And were you scared when you fell in love with Grandpa? Another asked. Josephine looked over at James, who was playing checkers with one of the older grandchildren. His hair was white now, and he moved more slowly than he once had. But his blue eyes were still as bright and kind as they had been the day they met. No, she said softly. Falling in love with your grandfather was the least scary thing I've ever done. He made everything else seem possible. In 1920, Josephine and James celebrated their 42nd wedding anniversary. The whole family gathered at the ranch for a massive celebration. There were over 30 people present, their children, their children's spouses, their grandchildren, Anna, and various friends they had accumulated over the decades. After dinner, Daniel stood up to make a toast. To my parents, he said, raising his glass, who taught me everything I know about love, partnership, and what it means to build something lasting. Ma, you saved your coins to buy a piece of land. Pa, you said let us put both our names on the deed. Together you built not just a ranch, but a family and a legacy. We are all here because you loved each other, and because you showed us what true partnership looks like. Everyone raised their glasses, and Josephine felt tears sliding down her cheeks. James put his arm around her and pulled her close. What are you thinking? He murmured in her ear. I am thinking about that young woman who arrived in Tucson with nothing but a mason jar full of coins and a dream, Josephine said. I wish I could go back and tell her that everything would work out better than she could possibly imagine. I wish I could tell her that she would find a partner who would treat her as an equal, that she would have children and grandchildren who would fill her life with joy, that she would build something that would last long after she was gone. She knew, James said. That young woman knew it all along. She just had to wait for it to happen. As the party continued around them, they slipped away to their favorite spot on the rocky outcropping. They moved slower now, and the climb was harder than it used to be, but the view was just as spectacular as it had always been. They sat together, James's arm around Josephine's shoulders, and watched the sun set over the land they had built together. Do you know what I love most about our story? Josephine asked. What? James replied. That it is ours. Not mine, not yours, but ours. From the moment you suggested putting both our names on the deed, we were true partners. Every decision, every success, every failure we faced together, that is what made the difference. That is what made everything possible, James agreed. I have never regretted treating you as an equal partner. In fact, it is the best decision I ever made. They sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned from gold to pink to purple. In the distance, they could hear the sounds of their family, the laughter and chatter of the people they had brought into the world and raised together. It was the sound of a life well lived, a love story that had defied the odds and built something beautiful. Josephine leaned her head on James's shoulder and closed her eyes, feeling utterly content. She thought about the long journey from that rented room in Tucson to this moment, from a lone woman with a jar of coins to the matriarch of a sprawling, happy family. Every step of that journey had been worth it. I love you, she said quietly. I love you too, James replied. Always have, always will. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, they made their way back down to the ranch house where their family waited. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new joys, as every day did. But they would face it together, as they had faced everything for more than 40 years. The Holloway Ranch continued to thrive for generations, passed down from parents to children, a testament to what two people could build when they treated each other as true equals. And whenever the family gathered, someone always told the story of how it all began, with a young woman who saved her coins to buy a piece of land, and a cowboy who said, "Let us put both our names on the deed." It was a love story for the ages, born in the wild and beautiful Arizona territory, built on respect and partnership and hard work. It was a story about choosing to face the world together rather than alone, about building something that would last long after the builders were gone. It was a story about love in its truest and most enduring form, and it all started with a mason jar full of coins and a dream. Josephine Marie Fletcher Holloway passed away peacefully in her sleep in 1925, at the age of 70. James held her hand as she took her last breath, and his grief was profound. But even in his sorrow, he was grateful for the 47 years they had shared, for the life they had built together, for the love that had sustained them through every trial. He lived another 3 years, during which time he continued to tell anyone who would listen about his remarkable wife. He told them how she had saved every penny for 4 years to buy her own land. He told them how she had stood up to Marcus Tanner when most men would have crumbled. He told them how she had been his partner in every sense of the word, how they had put both their names on every deed, made every decision together, faced every challenge side by side. When James passed away in 1928, he was buried next to Josephine on a hillside overlooking the ranch they had built together. The headstone read, "James and Josephine Holloway, partners in life and love, together forever." Their children continued to run the ranch, and their grandchildren after them, and their great-grandchildren after that. The original deeds, with both James and Josephine's names carefully written in fading ink, were framed and hung in the ranch house, a reminder of where it all began. And on summer evenings, when the family gathered on the porch as the sun set over the Arizona hills, someone always told the story. The story of the young woman who saved her coins to buy a piece of land, and the cowboy who said, "Let us put both our names on the deed." It was a story about courage and determination, about respect and partnership, about love that built something lasting. It was a story that began with a dream and ended with a legacy. It was a story that proved what could be accomplished when two people joined their lives as true equals, sharing both the burdens and the triumphs, the struggles and the joys. It was a story that reminded each new generation that the best things in life are built together, not alone. The story of James and Josephine Holloway became a part of Arizona's history, a tale told and retold, each time inspiring someone to believe that they too could build something remarkable. Young couples starting out together would reference them, saying they wanted a partnership like the Holloways had. Women fighting for their rights would point to Josephine as proof that women could own land and run businesses and be equal partners. Men would point to James as an example of the strength that comes from respecting and valuing your partner. The ranch itself became a symbol of what was possible when people worked together with respect and love. It survived the Great Depression, though times were hard. It survived droughts and floods, market crashes, and cattle diseases. It survived because each generation learned from the one before, because the values of partnership and equality and hard work were passed down like precious heirlooms. Daniel's grandson, named James after his great-grandfather, eventually wrote a book about his great-grandparents. It was called Names on the Deed, a love story from the Arizona Territory, and it became a regional bestseller. In it, he chronicled not just the romance between James and Josephine, but the revolutionary nature of their partnership at a time when women were rarely treated as equals. "My great-grandfather could have easily bought that land in his own name," James wrote in the introduction. "He could have married my great-grandmother and maintained sole ownership. That was what most men did at the time. But he chose differently. He recognized that they were building something together, and he wanted the legal documents to reflect that reality. It was a radical act of respect, and it set the tone for their entire marriage." The book included copies of the original deeds showing both James and Josephine's names in equal position. It included letters they had written to each other during the few times they were apart, letters full of affection and respect and genuine partnership. It included testimonies from people who had known them, all speaking of the obvious love and mutual regard that characterized their relationship. One particularly moving testimony came from Anna Holloway, written in 1940 when she was 80 years old, just a few years before her death. "I watched my brother and Josephine build their life together," she wrote. "It was not always easy. They faced prejudice from people who thought a woman had no business owning land or being an equal partner in a ranch operation. They faced financial hardship and natural disasters and all the normal struggles of life. But through it all, they never wavered in their commitment to each other and to their shared vision. My brother once told me that marrying Josephine and making her an equal partner was not a sacrifice. It was an investment that paid dividends every single day. He said that her ideas and her work were just as valuable as his, and treating her as anything less than equal would have been both foolish and unjust. The book concluded with reflections from the many descendants of James and Josephine, all of whom spoke about how their great or great-great-grandparents' example had shaped their own relationships. Women in the family spoke about expecting to be treated as equals. Men spoke about seeing their wives as partners rather than subordinates. Everyone spoke about the importance of mutual respect, shared decision-making, and working together toward common goals. What James and Josephine built was more than a successful ranch, the book concluded. They built a template for what a marriage could be when both partners were truly equal. They proved that respecting your spouse's contributions and treating them as a full partner did not weaken a marriage but strengthened it. Their love story is remarkable not just because it endured for so long, but because it was built on a foundation of genuine equality and mutual respect. That is the real legacy they left behind. The Holloway Ranch still stands today, now in its 6th generation of family ownership. The original cabin where Josephine first lived has been preserved as a historical site, and visitors can tour it and see the place where it all began. The rocky outcropping where James proposed has a small plaque commemorating the spot, placed there by the Holloway family in 1950. Every year on their anniversary, the family still gathers at the ranch. They tell the stories, look at the original deeds, and remember the two remarkable people who started it all. They raise a toast to James and Josephine, to the love that built a legacy, to the partnership that proved what was possible. And somewhere, in the vast and beautiful Arizona sky, two souls rest side by side, just as they lived, together always, partners forever. Their names join not just on legal documents, but in history itself. Their story lives on, inspiring each new generation to build their own lives with the same courage, respect, and love that characterized James and Josephine Holloway's remarkable journey. The mason jar that Josephine used to save her coins for 4 years is now displayed in a case in the ranch house, a tangible reminder of where it all began. Next to it is the original advertisement she carried in her apron pocket, the words still visible despite the passage of time. 40 acres for sale, 5 miles north of Tucson, good water, suitable for farming or ranching, $200 or best offer. Visitors to the ranch often ask to see these items, and family members are always happy to share the story. They tell about the young woman with nothing but determination and a dream. They tell about the cowboy who saw her as an equal when most men would not have. They tell about the partnership that built not just a successful ranch, but a model for how two people could join their lives and create something greater than either could have achieved alone. She saved her coins to buy a piece of land, the tour guides say, gesturing to the jar. And he said, "Let us put both our names on the deed." That simple act of respect and equality was the foundation for everything that came after. It was the beginning of a love story that lasted a lifetime and a legacy that has endured for generations. The story of James and Josephine Holloway has been adapted into a play that is performed every summer at the local theater in Tucson. It has been referenced in history books about women's rights and land ownership in the American West. It has been cited in marriage counseling sessions as an example of healthy partnership. It has been told and retold countless times, each telling reinforcing the simple but powerful message at its heart, that true love is built on respect, equality, and partnership. Their names appear together on historical markers throughout the area. Both are listed in the Arizona Pioneers Historical Society. Both are mentioned in the state archives. James and Josephine Holloway, partners in life, love, and legacy. And every time someone tells their story, every time a young couple decides to approach their marriage as true equals, every time a deed is written with both partners' names in equal position, the legacy of James and Josephine lives on. They proved that in the wild and unforgiving landscape of the Arizona territory, two people who respected each other and worked together could build something that would last far beyond their own lifetimes. The land they bought together, the land that started it all, is still productive today. The creek still flows just as Harold Sykes promised it would. The cabin has been restored, and preserved. The hills still roll away toward the horizon, dotted with the same mesquite and saguaro that Josephine saw when she first arrived. The view from the rocky outcropping is just as spectacular as it was when James proposed there in 1878. But more than the physical land, what endures is the example they set. An example of courage in the face of adversity. An example of standing up to bullies and refusing to be driven away from what was rightfully yours. An example of love that treated partners as equals rather than as owner and subordinate. An example of building something together that neither could have built alone. That is the true legacy of James and Josephine Holloway, not just the land or the ranch or even the family they created, but the example they set for how two people could join their lives in true partnership. They proved that putting both names on the deed was not just a legal formality, but a declaration of respect and equality that would strengthen everything they built together. Their love story began with a mason jar full of coins and a dream of land ownership. It grew through hard work, mutual respect, and unwavering partnership. It endured through drought and fire, through the hostility of enemies and the challenges of frontier life. And it created a legacy that has lasted for more than a century, inspiring countless others to build their own lives on the same foundation of equality and respect. In the end, that is what makes the story of James and Josephine Holloway so remarkable and so enduring. It is not just a love story, though it is certainly that. It is not just a Western tale of survival and triumph, though it is that too. It is a story about what becomes possible when two people treat each other as true equals, when they put both their names on the deed, when they face the world together as partners in every sense of the word. And so the story continues to be told generation after generation, a testament to the power of love built on respect, to dreams achieved through partnership, to the lasting legacy two people can create when they join their lives as true equals. The story of a woman who saved her coins to buy a piece of land, and a cowboy who said, "Let us put both our names on the deed," ensuring that what they built together would always belong to both of them, equally and forever.